Hey folks, thanks so much for being here. Just wanted to give you a quick heads up. What you're listening to is an episode from VJ Talks, my podcast. And this is a re-upload, so if you hear anything about, hey, go check out this link, go check out this forum, etc., it's more than likely not there anymore. So just wanted to give you that heads up before you went looking for something that wasn't there. Either way, thank you so much for watching. Please enjoy, and let me know what you think in the comments. Catch you later. Hello and welcome to VJ Talks, a bi-monthly podcast presented by VJH Creations LLC, where I talk about anything and everything to do with TTRPGs and sometimes wider pop culture. I want to give a quick shout out to Arcane Anthems for providing the intro and outro music you hear for this podcast. Arcane Anthems creates free music for tabletop role-playing streams and podcasts. Music adds immersion, tension, and emotion to games, but often streams and podcasts shy away from using music for fear of legal ramifications. Arcane Anthems wants to make it simple to add music to your games. Hello, everybody. Welcome to VJ Talks. Super happy to be back. This is an episode where we go to the more part of it. And for those of you that are new here, the tagline for this is we talk about the breadth and depth of TTRPG space and sometimes wider pop culture. And this is the pop culture episode. I think this counts as pop culture. But we are going to be talking about the one, the only, the fabulous, the amazing Scott Summers and why he's right. Because I am also on this boat as well. But joining me is an amazing creator in the space, and please introduce yourselves. Let my lovely listeners know who
hi everybody. My name is Barnaby, or at least that's the internet knows me as, is Barnaby. You can find me at _Barnaby on everything that matters, or everything that's still around right now. I mean, who knows? When this comes out, it'll all be gone. We don't know. But until then, you can find me at that's _Barnaby all over the internet. Hi everybody. I also love Scott Summers.
And all right, y'all. So to start this off, Barnaby, you are teaching a Intro to Scott Summers course. I'm a wide-eyed freshman. I know nothing about Scott Summers. I know nothing about the comics. Who is this man? What is he in? What's the vibe before we dive into the big stuff?
Scott Summers. What an interesting light, man. So Scott Summers is an Alaskan native, stands about 6'3", who is the leader of the X-Men. He is one of the original X-Men. Some would even say he is the X-Men. He is the leader and has been for most of the run of the comics. Obviously, leadership has changed. Storm's been the leader for a little bit. Rogue, Wolverine. I think Jean, even for a small amount of time. I'm sure somebody will fucking correct me. But Scott Summers, for all intents and purposes, has been seen as the leader of the X-Men. His mutant power is that he shoots a concussive blast from his eyes that is actually from a different dimension. It's not lasers, which I think a lot of people always confuse it with, because they can bounce off of walls. And he uses it much like Captain America in that he uses geometry and math on the fucking fly to shoot people with it. But you know what the funny part is though? It is the least interesting thing about Scott Summers as a character. His power, it's cool, it's neat, but he is best known as being in the upper echelon of master tacticians and leaders in all of the Marvel Universe. Not just like the X-Men, but in all of the Marvel Universe. He is a complicated man. He is a cheater. Probably one of the most famous cheaters in all of comics. On his wife, and there's lots of complicated things around his wife and Mandolin Pryor and all kinds of other things around that. The 90s, Chris Claiborne, a menace. The 90s were a mess. But Scott has led the mutants through a lot of really hard moments because they are a very sloppy allegory for racism in the comics. That in itself is a whole other discussion, but I think there's lots of interesting things about Scott Summers, particularly when we have conversations around the model minority, or what does it mean to be a leader, and what does it mean to be a symbol for a group of people, because in the comics eventually the X-Men become almost like an extinct species. There's only 199 post the House of M. And he does everything he can to preserve that. And classic Greek or Shakespeare, he kills his father. He kills his father. Both of them at various points. I'm pretty sure he kills his father, Star Fox, right? Okay,
Don't
yeah.
listen. I'm
I
not
know
the.
for definite that he kills Charles Xavier. Spoilers for something that happened
Mhm.
20 fucking years ago, but he kills Charles Xavier, for a myriad of, I would view as valid reasons. Plenty of people will, but
I would
we'll
also.
get into that. But Scott Summers is an amazing leader. He's made lots of tough choices, and for me, as somebody who is Asian American and Black, I think he has a lot of interesting things to say or parallels for me in my own life around conversations around the model minority and Black excellence when we talk about those things. So I have a deep love and connection for him, even though he is a white man. But in the, the comics, he is a minority within the comics, even though he is a white. And he's not cis anymore. But I haven't caught up with the comics, but I hear he's in a polyamorous relationship with Jean and Wolverine.
Wolverine. Yep.
So
That's my understanding as well.
representation king. We love to see it. But yeah, that's Scott Summers. Do you feel like you have a good beat on the man, the myth? I'm sure there's tons of bias in this. This was not a biased opinion. But that, but that's Scott. I love my little purple. He's my little man. My little revolutionary.
Yeah, if I knew nothing, if I didn't have any understanding or any introduction to the man, I am not as well read as our lovely guest here on Scott Summers. I did reread some things I'd read previously, read some new runs that I was suggested to read for this conversation. But I've been a comic nerd for most of my life because of my dad, and it started with the X-Men. So I know Scott Summers to a degree and whatnot, including the big messiness around cheating on wives, plural. But yeah, no, if I didn't know anything else, I'd feel like, okay, I have a decent concept about the man. I'm ready to go deeper than this intro 101 first day of class session. And so I think the thing that I would love for you to talk more on. So the premise of this conversation we're having is we're talking about, we're like, the literal title of of the recording session we're in is Scott Summers Defense. I should have put squad at the end of that because I also defend this man. But to get to the defense part, I think we need to talk about his behavior as a model minority and what that looked like before and who enabled or directed him into that. If you don't mind speaking
This
more
is
on
a defense. I will speak as though I am speaking in defense. Members of the jury, if you please. Scott Summers is a perfect depiction of the model minority. Now, what does this mean when we talk about model minority? There is an idea that society has that if a minority person, a person of color, most of the time when we are talking about this, acts in a certain way based on what is normal in society, that assimilation will be allowed. We see this a lot of times in American culture with, we use a broad brush here, the Irish, who at one time weren't considered white, a lot of Southeast Asian Americans, a lot of just Asian Americans in general experience this on some form or another. And there's plenty of other groups within that, the Jewish community having to deal with model minority and stuff. Anything where there's an expectation that you are to be a certain way in proximity to whiteness or proximity to whatever the norm is for a society. And Professor X, Charles Xavier, that was his whole thing. His whole thing was assimilation. And the first X-Men, who is Scott Summers, desperately wanted that approval, desperately wanted to be that thing. And so much of his, especially early run of comics, is him suffering on trying to uphold these unrealistic ideals and trying to achieve this unrealistic goal without having any sort of personality and stuff. Because I think there's a lot of times when people argue that Scott Summers is a boring character and that there's nothing behind them, right? Their basis for that is the 90s cartoon, right? The 90s cartoon and/or, it's weird that it's been 20 years, the X-Men movie. Where they do my boy so wrong because there's so much of his story early on in the X-Men comics, and the way the piece that they took for the animated series in the 90s was that Scott Summers is just a quote unquote the perfect man, the perfect just perfect was like the thing they were going for. And you hear that kind of language a lot when it comes to like model minority stuff of like, you need to be perfect, you need to have the best grades, you need to be in your best behavior and meet the expectations of whatever society has in order for us to gain success or assimilate. And that is so much the crux of Charles Xavier's run of the X-Men, is assimilation is the only way we will gain peace. Now obviously that changes over time, but I think that's the big piece when we're talking about Scott Summers, of like why he perfectly encapsulates that, because most of his stress early on is not managing the team, it's living up to these unrealistic expectations, and it's a stressor for him. And it doesn't give him any room to, like, especially early on, be a person. And they address that several times in the comics, of this, the weight of leadership. And it's not only the weight of leadership, right? Because Steve, Captain America, is a leader. We see Tony be a leader. We see different people be a leader in the Marvel Universe, but not have to carry that same weight that Scott does. Because Scott is not only the leader of the X-Men, but a representative for the entirety of his race. And I think it's a good way to, like, for me as a young, like, Black Asian American, know that pain, know what it feels like to, like, I can only be the best, otherwise I represent the worst parts. If I ever should fall, then it looks terrible and looks bad on me. So for me, that's what it looks like when we talk about Scott Summers being the perfect example of the model minority. Thoughts, VJ?
Yeah. So, I mean, as you said, I too also like often hear the model minority referred to for like people of the Asian diaspora, but there's also that part of it, and within Black culture and Black excellence, very much had that own talk from my parents of like, hey, you got to do this, you got to be good, you can't mess up, you can't, like, whenever I would like act up in public, there would be like swift like repercussions, if not there when I got home. And while a lot of the times, not until I like got older did my parents tie it to like that kind of, hey, you're Black. And not to say that my parents didn't like give me that conversation or try to educate me on like various like my Blackness and whatnot, but I definitely wasn't very receptive to it until I got older. But there was very clearly that, now that I look back on it, that whole thing of like, hey, you're Black, you have to be excellent. Like, you can't have bad grades. You can't misbehave. You can't get into like altercations with other people, especially not other Black people, right? Because that just like, that's a big mess of like two Black people engaging in something like a fight, for example, and just reflecting poorly on all of us kind of situation. And yeah, I definitely gotta agree with that, because thinking back to some of the so whenever I think about, like, I've been thinking about Scott, right, in preparation for this conversation, obviously, and whenever I think about Scott, and like how he's led the X-Men, how he's behaved from Charles Xavier's teachings, I've always got to think about Magneto in Magneto's group in contrasting with that, because Magneto is very much the like person of color minority that's very much,
we should all went back to Africa.
That's very much just like like, one, yes, we should go back, like we shouldn't be pulling up this, but also too is like is frequently pushing back on that idea that like being a model minority is not going to save us, it's not going to fix us. And like just the struggles that Scott like even in places where like being the model minority sometimes helps, like I can't give you the exact issues, but I recall there are the occasional times where it's like, okay, you've shown that you're a good minority and things are fine for this very small moment. It never stays that way. It always goes back to like, oh, we're about to start villainizing everybody again. And so just watching the ways in which Scott has like strained under that until finally like breaking, as it were, air quotes because y'all can't see my fingers, has been really interesting to watch, like his journey for that. And also just the, man, I don't know if like the point of, I don't want to, like, what's the words? What is the word the words I'm looking for? I don't want to assume sometimes when I'm reading these comics, I'm wondering, did they do this is this very much purposeful, or is it just like, because the way they've made him the model minority, and then we have like we have Magneto and all of this other stuff, and then they've, like, as time has gone on, we're now in this part where he's no longer that, and he's very much more, like, more often than not on, like, like more of Magneto's side of things, even if he's not engaging in it the same way.
Like Magneto and Xavier are different conversations around proximity to whiteness, right? Where Xavier believes in assimilation. He believes that the only way for us to gain peace and equality is to assimilate to the standards of our oppressors. Where Magneto is like, the only way we get our freedom and peace is that we take on the role of our oppressors, right? Where he's not looking, he's looking to eradicate humans or to subjugate humans because in his mind they are lesser. And he is upset that he has been, rightfully so upset, given his history with, like, the Nazis and Auschwitz and all that other stuff. Never wants to be it's a trauma response for him. But in doing so, it's that conversation we have, like, in, those people who don't know, I do, like, DEI work, like, lots of conversations with racism, right? It's that conversation that we see with, like, Black Hoteps or, like, Massage Noir, where, like, they're not looking to gain equality. They only want equality for themselves, and, like, what they call equality. Right, they're only looking for it for themselves, and Magneto feels the same way. It's that VJ, me and you both black. It's that it's those black men who, like, rub their hands together, the Umar Johnsons of the world who who are like, the black man is the greatest man in the world, and it is the job of his wife is to be subjugated, and black queer people aren't allowed to exist because they're queer first and black second. And it's those conversations, and it's them both having, like, trying to build something around proximity to whiteness. The fun part, especially when we get to the person we're talking about with Scott and Cyclops, is he's not trying to participate in whiteness. That he's not trying to participate in the minority. He is trying to build something all unto itself, and try to achieve equality. He has no problem with, humans. His only thing he's wanting is the safety of his people. Especially as, like, the stakes get higher and higher and higher. And does he make mistakes along the way? Definitively. When we look at, like, X-Men versus Avengers, definitively makes lots of mistakes along the way. But I think he is closer to achieving what I think ideologically both Magneto and Charles wanted than they ever were capable of doing, right? Because so much of, like, what Charles and Eric did was based on trauma, right? And for better, for lack of, for better or worse, everybody who's involved in this, like, ideological warfare over, like, where do mutants stand in society, it's all trauma based, right? What Scott's going through, trauma based. He's making decisions based on the trauma that he has had to suffer personally, and is trying to ensure that no one ever has to suffer it again. The same with Eric. Eric's childhood and his perspective is all trauma informed. And just from, like, if it's easy for us, like, people who aren't, like, and we all suffer through it, right? Like, our trauma informs how we move and talk about things in the world. And we see that with Scott, we see that with Eric, we see that with Charles, and just ideologically, Scott's the closest. And, like, I think in understand, I think he also, like, understands, like, on a meta level, his place in the narrative, because he's not ever trying to be the good guy. He understands, and I think Eric also, when, like, Eric and Cyclops start teaming up together, they both understand, my job is not to be at the top of the mountain. I'm perfectly fine with being buried underneath the rubble. The real person we are building this for is Hope, right? Hope is the real end game here, because the children are our future. As corny as that sounds, I think everybody involved is, at least when it comes to, like, Magneto and Cyclops, is trying to make sure nobody ever has to experience their trauma again, so that they do not repeat the same mistakes.
Do you like, while we're on the note of this, I'm immediately drawn to, like, okay, so one of my exes had me big fan of Firefly. disclaimer, y'all, if you haven't watched it, it has a bunch of problems, but there's a part of it, maybe the movie, I think it is, that like wrapped everything up, where there's that one black guy that's like, this world isn't for me. I know what I am.
Yeah,
I'm like a monster kind of
movie.
situation, and like I'm doing this for a future I'm not really gonna get to see, and maybe I don't have a place in that society. Does it feel like in the runs and readings of Scott, right? Like when they have man, I always forget the, like in the various, there has been various attempts at having like mutant sanctuaries, right? Like couple of islands, we got Krakoa right now and everything that's going on with it. Does it ever feel like with Scott at the very least, because sometimes it feels like that to me with Magneto, that they're just like, we know we're gonna have to do, there are a lot of terrible things that are gonna pave the way for what we want to happen, like for example Scott assembling the X-Force, right, and all of their shady stuff. Does it feel like to you that they're in that space of like, this world isn't for me, despite actually like still existing in it whenever they actually create it?
And we see that right when, again, spoilers, when Scott gets killed, when Scott dies, we see that like he's perfectly at peace and knows that like this, like the point was hope. The point was like that future generations, I'm not making it to the end of this. I will never see the fruits of my labor, which for people who are listening, who do like activism work, that's really what you're always shooting for. You will never see the fruits of our labor. James Baldwin, Martin Luther King, all those people who came before us that did like civil rights work, or anybody who does any sort of like activism work that is trying to like make change or progress, we understand implicitly that the labor that we do today we will never enjoy the fruits of that. We are enjoying the fruits of our forebears. And I think Scott understands that more so, because like with Magneto and Charles, right, they were like, I'm gonna get this in my lifetime, right? They're like, I'm trying to get change now, right? And that's a reasonable response, right, for anyone who is a minority group, of like, I'm suffering now. Why can't we solve the problem now? And the sad reality when it comes to systemic issues is that it is slow change. And I think Scott understands that better than the other two, because he's had to live under both of these regimes. He's had to experience both of these ideologies, and realizing there is no quick fix to this. There is no quick fix that doesn't implicitly hurt our people. It has to be slow. It has to be slow, and it has to be systemic, and systemic change takes a long time. And I think it's also, like, as a person who does like activism work, a big part of like why I also like love Scott is like, Scott is a bad person. Here's me saying it. Scott Pilgrim. Scott Summers. Scott Pilgrim is also a bad person, but Scott Summers is a bad man who is trying to do good with that badness. And I think it's very endearing. And I don't know if it's the right thing. Right. I also like, I'm just commiserating with this man who is trying to help build a better future in a way that is, though trauma informed, is not as bad as the other two people who came before him, trying to learn from their mistakes, and is hoping that people like Hope and such will learn from their mistakes. And we see that with a little bit of the run of Hope. I haven't read a whole bunch of Hope. I kind of fell off of comics around like 2014, 2015, but at the time it felt like Hope was doing better than, because a lot of her decisions and a lot of things that she's seen the world through were not trauma informed. Like not only did Scott make sure that, a Cable also made sure of that, which is another complicated conversation about Scott and his son and the things that go on between those two. But yeah, I feel like I cut you off. I kind of went off on a tangent. I just really love Scott Summers.
No. I was trying to get to a point somewhere, and my brain was having a hard time even like putting together what I was trying to say, and so that tangent was perfect. And I can't go back to it. I'm not. Gentle listeners, if it comes back to me, it'll get added at the end. Like, it'll be like, hey, I remember what I was trying to say here. But I feel like we've talked about the man posts, like we've talked about the man pre like breaking away from that model minority. We've talked about who he is, the things he's trying to do outside of being that model minority. But let's specifically talk about the runs. Let's talk about like, because we're defending. Scott needs a defense squad because people act like this man is the fucking worst. And let's be clear here: there have been worse people. Not to say that there being worse people does not make him bad. Like I can also agree with Barnaby. Scott's not a good guy. He does fucked up shit. He, that X-Men versus Avengers run, like, there was some fucked up shit that happened in there, and I'm just like,
say this, because people always come for me for Scott, and here's one thing. Can I say nigga on here? Can I say that? Yeah,
say whatever you want.
Here are constantly defending Wolverine. Wolverine was committed multiple war crimes, but he's just a little guy, you will say. Well, you know what? Scott's just a little guy, too. I'm so tired of these. Listen, I've been able to suffer through this through all the 90s and the 2000s. Wolverine is just as much of a problem as Scott Summers, and I'm tired of us pretending like that they're not the same motherfucker, because they are the same motherfucker. They both want the same problematic redhead. They both will co-sign on all the crimes they need to or want to commit to make that happen. I want to get that out of the way that I do love Wolverine as a character, especially nowadays, and him and Scott's relationship, I think, is a lot better than it was prior. Obviously, because they're in a polyamorous relationship, and we love to see it. I don't know if they stayed in one, but I do remember there was a little while they were in a polyamorous relationship, because everyone should win. But I do love Wolverine, but I think people often constantly use him as a foil to Scott. That one is inherently better than the other when they're men. Let's never forget that they're just men.
Yeah, exactly. And just like on the note of them, like, that's the same guy in a different fucking font. Like, Scott might have been the one that started X-Force, but correct me if I'm wrong, Wolverine is very much like agreed to do it at different points, has like either been a part of the team or led the team. Like, X-Force did some really fucked up shit in the name of the greater good. But like, Scott's like, I did something terrible. I can't ask the X-Men to do this because it's bad. And Wolverine is also engaging in that badness. And there's no conversation around where you can just say, well, he's just following orders. That like they're both willing to engage, like you said, in all of this bad behavior for the goal that they want for their people. And like, if Wolverine's just a little guy, which he is, so is Scott. But talk to me about where's the like start of Scott breaking out of the model minority? Like, talk to me about the situation that happened around that in your own
I don't know
words.
what comic run it is, but I remember it vividly.
That's fine.
And for me, it's him dating Emma Frost. I believe that the beginning of Scott like acknowledging his trauma and doing stuff around that is him cheating on Jean Grey again, and dating Emma Frost. Emma Frost, for behind every great man is a greater woman, and Emma Frost is that. Jean could never. Jean Grey is great. I love Jean Grey as a character. I think a lot of times people only put her as a damsel in distress, but she was not good for Scott. I think Emma was the best thing there, because you know what she did? She made that nigga go to therapy. She made him go to therapy and really acknowledge a lot of peace, and also helped him get self-confidence, because a lot of times we forget, like, Scott was just pretending, a lot of times early on, of like having it together, and didn't always have it together, and also didn't know how to communicate his needs to other people until he meets Emma, right? Because Jean very much, they had that whole damsel in distress, knight in shining armor, relationship for a long time in the comics. And then Emma comes around like, I don't need saving at all. In fact, you're the damsel in distress. I will be saving you now. And so the beginning and the end for me is Emma Frost. Emma Frost is the best version of Yoko Ono. And it's her like being like, you need to acknowledge your trauma, and like the things Charles Xavier has done to you are not normal things. It's like, I don't know if you have this experience, VJ, like being a Black American, but like I'm married to a white man, and sometimes I'll tell my husband like some things that happened in my childhood, and my husband will be like, "That's child abuse." That's child abuse. And I think the same moment comes for Scott, where he's telling Emma all these things that he's done, and she like gently grabs him by the side of his face. Is like, "Baby, that's child abuse. You've been abused and emotionally manipulated. You were a child soldier. You need to hold and think about that. You have been fighting grown men and monsters since you were like 16 years old. The moment you hit puberty, you unwillingly signed up for a war that you did not want to participate in, right? And then he goes to confront Charles, and Charles is like, nah. Like, Charles tries to like emotionally manipulate him again, right? Tries to do all these abuser tactics, and Scott doesn't. You know what? I'm not gonna say that Scott doesn't handle it well, because if I was in the same situation, given the same people, I'm not gonna say that I wouldn't at close range shoot my abuser in the face with an optic blast and kill him. Who amongst us have not been in that situation and been like, if only I had concussive blasts from a different dimension, I too would, like, you know, put down my abuser. And I think for a lot of people, Charles Xavier was like because I hate when people compare him to Martin Luther King, because Charles Xavier first and foremost did not have the same ideals, and is for what I like view, like what white people view, like, you know, peaceful coexistence looking like, is that it's assimilation, it's the unchanging of the norm. And to have like the representative of that, what they would view as like peace, killed violently by his first student, immediately paints Scott as like a villain. Never mind that Charles Xavier has been more than happy to put children's lives at risk, repeatedly, to emotionally manipulate them, and psychically manipulate them. We find out multiple times that he has done these things, quote unquote, for the sake of their safety, or for the sake of, you know, the greater humankind, using his, like, because he's the most powerful telepath in the world, right? I'm sure somebody's surpassing now. Comics constantly changing what that ranking is, but he's an Omega level mutant, isn't he? He's an Omega. Is Charles Xavier? Yeah, let's Xavier. Not considered an Omega level mutant. Okay.
Alpha level among mutants. Even Jean Grey surpassed him to become Omega level.
I wasn't sure if he was.
It does say that if he would cut loose and hold nothing back, he could potentially go full Omega. And I'm a little worried about that, because what does that even mean for this man who is just doing all of this wild manipulation to begin with?
But Onslaught is his persona.
That's
just Charles Xavier. Let's also never forget that Charles Xavier tried to strangle his twin in the womb, because everyone forgets about
Cassandra, who, remind me if I'm wrong, there was that, so we have that X-Men run that has like Jean, like the younger Jean Grey, and is growing up, and Cassandra is like, Jean Grey and Cassandra mentally fight off in this run at some point, right? Because Cassandra's trying to do some fuck shit. Yeah, okay, so y'all, Cassandra is bad, but the man tried to strangle his sister in the womb, his twin sister. So yeah, homie's been unhinged from the moment he was conceived. But
for a lot of people, that's not the public perception, right? Of here is what is supposed to be the epitome of mutant kind in Scott Summers, killing the symbol of peace, or like the person who has been the representative of like peace between humans and mutant kind. And so this is the beginning of the freedom of Scott Summers from, you know, separating himself from his trauma, separating himself from like Charles's ideologies, right? Because up until this point, he has always embodied, whether he agreed with it or not, the ideals of Charles Xavier. What Charles Xavier's dream was. He was the most devout follower of that for a long time. And when Emma comes along, and I'm sure people will say it even before that, but for me, the part that sticks out in my head is him cheating on Jean and being with Emma and their whole relationship, which is one of the best relationships in comics that has ever existed, because they both implicitly understand one another. We begin to see him unpack that and trying to figure out what his own ideologies are and what it is that he wants to see in the world, with the help of like Emma. And Emma is not a great person, but she's a good partner. She is also not.
Yeah. Speaking of her being a bad person, so I very much gotta agree. Like, even if like, I don't have a solid place of where I think Scott goes from being that model minority to like really going down the path of like, I'm stepping away from that. I've got a clearer vision, even though there are going to be terrible things along the path to get there. Do you feel like it isn't just the fact that Emma is like, you were a child soldier, and like, just to touch on that, yes, I've also had that experience of being like, ha 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 ha, my parents did this to me, and somebody's like,
that's abuse, baby.
You were abused. I'm like, I gotta sit with that. Do you think it's also the fact that like for most of Emma's run, and I'd even say even now in some ways she's a villain. Like, there's that like, do you think there's, I don't want to say that Emma lures him to like the darker side of things or anything like that, because that's not true Scott, in my opinion.
More so than anything, she teaches Scott how to be selfish, because so much of his life he's been taught to be altruistic, to do for others, that being a true leader is that. When Emma's like, but what about you? Emma, and I think like parts of Scott sort of like influence Emma as well. Emma, after this, even though she's still a villain, she does have a deep love for her people. She does have, these moments of like, I'll do the greater good, but in my own way, that she didn't have prior, because she was like, she was in Hellfire Club, right? Like, prior to that, she was in Hellfire Club, and she's completely different. And then like after she's with Scott, she's a completely different person. And I think they both teach each other things that they lacked, and both complemented each other in these ways of both like being very like strong conviction people, who taught the other one how to do or engage with, at least to some degree, the thing that they were lacking, and gave Scott like room to be messy and fuck up, and was his biggest defender, right, as we all want from our partners, of like, to like call me on my shit, but also don't let nobody talk shit about me behind my back.
Exactly. And if y'all don't know, Emma is the queen of calling this man out on his shit. Like, will strip him down bare when he needs it. Like, and not in like a, not in, I definitely think there have been some toxic elements around the pair being together, but it's that type of toxicity. It's like they're both, I want to be clear when I say this. It's that kind of type of toxicity where you recognize both halves have like toxic traits, and the ways that they're clashing is very dangerous. And if it's not like worked through with each other, it's going to turn the entire relationship bad in a way that like your friends will be like, you can't stay here. And they'll have a good reason to tell you that. But they do engage with each other in toxic ways sometimes, but they've grown and moved away out of it. And it's very much like responses from how their lives have been led, and less about like one of them being like a toxic, abusive partner to another one or anything like that. And definitely, in my opinion, for that relationship, and like to talk about Emma in this, because like the things that Scott does is pretty much always in conjunction with Emma as a partner the second they like actually realize they're in love with each other. Like, if Scott's engaging in a fucked up plan to keep like the mutants safe, Emma is right there in one way or another, like doing something or another. Or if she's not there and it looks like she's on the enemy side, that is part of the plan as well. Like, she's always there in one way or another. And I also gotta agree, they're one of those really great couples that has just like modeled something that has toxicity in it but has grown and moved past it and isn't one of those things that is just toxic for toxic sake. It makes sense for the characters and it builds up on the story for them. But
yeah, I was just gonna say, I think they are a couple that is not built to last. They are meant for where they both were in that moment in the comics and in their own narratives. They needed to be with one another. Even if it hadn't been in a like sexual relationship, because it was very much a sexual relationship, the two of them need, like, for better or worse, narratively needed each other. Because there are plenty of times where, because Emma never strays from her convictions. That is one of my favorite things about her as a character. She is confidence personified. But there are times where Scott goes through with the plan and is like, I'm not sure, and she's like, don't ever question yourself. You did this thing, and here's this thing. Having someone to be able to like lift up his chin and be like, this needed to be done. This needed to be done, and yet nobody will like us. I think to like post like Dark X-Men or Dark Avengers, whenever Hank McCoy, who of all fucking people, listen, fuck Hank McCoy. I don't fuck both versions of Hank McCoy, but Hank McCoy comes in on his high fucking horse and is like, you both have secrets, and all these secrets need to come to bear, and you need to come clean and tell everybody, because you're just going to be just as bad as Charles, or you're going to be just as bad as Magneto. And he leaves, right? And he comes in, right, well, like, they're about to clearly have sex. Like, and I don't, if anyone reads these, I just read, like, all the comic runs leading up to this conversation. They're, like, in bed with no clothes on, and there's Hank McCoy looming over them, post him like saving him from being tortured, to be like, there needs to be no more secrets. You all need to come clean. And they talk about it like in Dark X-Men Confession, where Emma's like, we don't have to apologize for shit. We got everything we wanted. What's there to apologize for? And Scott's like, no, we need to come clean. She's like, fuck these niggas. We don't need to do anything.
I think the only truth was in that, and this isn't even what Beast was saying, is they needed to come clean to each other, right? Because I'm like, I think the pair work best when they're just honest about the, like, the things, the fuckery that they're getting into, right? Like, Scott hiding the X-Force stuff, Emma not like immediately telling Scott about, oh man, fuck, she got invited to like some dark organization, like people that, yeah, she got invited to that, and she was like, I got invited to this because they knew who I am at my heart. I like traded this for this and whatnot. And I'm just like, y'all should just tell each other these secrets, because at the end of the day, it was fine. And like you said, it was like, we don't have to apologize for shit, my man. We got everything we wanted. And I don't think, and I gotta agree, I mean, at least in their situation, right? I gotta agree. I'm like, I don't think y'all have anything to apologize for. Should you maybe explain what you did? Sure. Apologize for it? No, because clearly, like, the other things that were tried were not working. And like, speaking of other things that were tried and not working, I like, just to hone in on something, just again, to defend Scott Summers, right? Members of the jury, the audience, obviously. I would like us to hone in and talk about, okay, I have this pulled up. Man, let's go back to the first page so I can, okay, Avengers versus X-Men, right? So in this run, right, the Phoenix Force is coming. There's a lot of shit happening with Hope Summers. Those of you that don't know, the Phoenix Force is this cosmic entity that is sometimes very useful and sometimes very genocidal. Like, exists on that whole spectrum of like benevolent, malevolent entity that inhabits an individual. And there is a lot of, and this is also the run where Scott kills Professor X, and rightfully so, in my opinion, right? But just to talk on like why Scott, like explaining why Scott engages in a lot of these like bad things to get to a good outcome. Like in rereading this issue, so after like in issue 4 of this, the Phoenix Force is finally there. The Avengers with Wolverine on the Avengers side is trying to take Hope so that the so that the Phoenix Force won't get her. And Tony, being the fuckhead that he is, does something to the Phoenix Force, and instead of just inhabiting Hope, it splits itself into 5 people: Scott, Emma, Namor, Magic, and Colossus. And like right after that, the first things any of them do is they start fixing stuff, right? Like to compare it to a DC thing, right? So you have Injustice, right, where Superman, after the loss of his wife and child at his own hands because of the Joker and Harley Quinn, is like, no more war. Is like going around disarming things, being very like totalitarian and whatnot. Can very much argue that the Phoenix Five, as they are engaging in like that sort of same like no more war. Hey, we're talking villains down. We're turning them into energy for the country they're from. We're converting places into schools and whatnot. They're doing that kind of same behavior, but not. I think it's fair to say not in that totalitarian sense, because they're not coming from a place of like, I've just had an immense amount of grief happen in this moment, and now I'm lashing out about it. And it's more like, we have the power to remake the world, so it's better for us. And I think the fact that they make things better for their own people, and then it also makes things better for the rest of the world, is one of those examples of how like systemic oppression harms everybody. And when you start dismantling it, like a rising tide lifts all ships and stuff. And like, when they're doing that, they're not doing anything like bad. They're not like hurting anybody. And like Hank McCoy, for all his fuckery, even calls it out when the Phoenix Five are going around fixing things and whatnot. And the Avengers, Captain America, Tony, and Wolverine are like, okay, what are we going to do about this? How do we fix it? And Hank is just like, what are we doing here? Are they doing anything wrong? What's happening? And Hank is agreeing with T'Challa, who was like, they're not doing anything bad. Like, T'Challa even explicitly calls out, for the first time, Ethiopians are leaving from Wakanda, like refugees, and are going back home, who fled for like various reasons, like including like war and dangerous government or whatnot. And so like Scott and the others are doing good things, and I think it's a fair statement to say things take a sideways turn as the Avengers continue to oppose it. And I know they're in this thought process of like, well, they're gonna go dark at some point. Scott doesn't become the Dark Phoenix until after he kills, and until he's pushed into killing Charles Xavier, who very much is engaging in this like fucked up abuser logic. Like, let me read something to y'all, because reading this, I was like, you've got to be fucking kidding me. This man. Okay, so it's over, Scott. I warned you, if you continue down this path, I was going to stop you. You need help, and I will help you. I'm like, the balls on this man to think I'm not here to argue, and I'm not here to fight. I'm here to help. Admit you need it, and this will all go in a. And then Scott cuts him off. The ego on you. I finally put the world the way it's supposed to be. I did it, me, and it kills you. And the last bit here, this is Charles. You sit as a judge and jury of the human race, even though I specifically taught you patience. And Scott is saying, no, you sat in that chair of yours for years and did nothing. And instead of praising me for my bold vision, instead of thanking me for saving our people, you come here to threaten me. Shame on you. But yeah, like, my understanding of those runs of comics is that they for those of you that don't know, or for those of you that like racking your mind, this is also the run of comics where Namor flooded Wakanda and killed a bunch of people. But my understanding, like I said, before they were getting pushed back, they were just going around the world fixing stuff for humans and mutant kind. And things didn't get like in that more bad kind of totalitarian area until people kept pushing and
Let's
kept
also
pushing.
not forget that the Avengers kidnapped and experimented on a child. Because like
yes.
For me, the big narrative around like X-Men versus Avengers is it's about control. The Avengers at every point are like, it's not about safety, it's about how can we control them. Like it speaks to like that part of like Charles Xavier that is a constant theme in him around assimilation, around like we need to step in line with what these people have. And most of like we would not get to this point had it not been for the Avengers. And if the Avengers did not keep pushing, right? And also like they had what is essentially like the Jesus of the X-Men, the Messiah of the X-Men, like captured, right? That's like somebody stealing the Pope, right? Like it's like someone stealing the Dalai Lama and capturing and torturing, because with Not Forget they also experimented on Hope, and that's why the Phoenix Force split into 5, and they use her to try to figure out a way how to like stop these people from not really doing anything other than, for the first time in a long time, having control of their narrative. And then, you know, are like, oh, we need to stop this bad thing from happening. What if they get out of control? What if they get out of control? And the reason it gets out of control is because they're so dead set on pushing it to get out of control. And when it gets out of control, they're like, you see, this is what we were trying to prevent, even though they're the ones that caused it. And it's just very interesting. And then after that, like, and I may be confusing runs, but I don't think Scott ever apologizes for it. I think Scott stands up in it, and it's like, it's like, because everyone forgets there's years, hundreds, maybe not hundreds of years. There's a long system of oppression, and even leading up to those series that lead us to X-Men versus Avengers. Everyone forgets about Dark Avengers. And all the shit that went on with that, with all the runs that lead Secret Wars, and the Civil War, or Civil War is the one I'm thinking of. Like, of all that, all the mutant kind has suffered. House of M, all these things. And House of M, for people who don't know, is when Wanda Maximoff wishes there to be no more mutants. She effectively creates the genocide of her people, and then there's only the 199 mutants that exist. And then with Hope brings back the mutant babies start being born again, with Hope being there, or she's able to reawaken people's powers as like part of her power set, so that she's able to like awaken latent mutant abilities in people, right? And like it's a group of people who were almost brought to the, you know, the brink of extinction, turning around and trying to like make sure that doesn't happen again, trying to ensure a better future, because they've done, like, it's a group of people being pushed to like have no other option, and then people being mad that they went with the only options that they had in front of them, right? It's just, I don't know, as a black person, as a trans person, as somebody who's just littered in minority things, I will never not side with the X-Men in this conversation, because Tony Stark's a cop. Tony Stark's a cop. I don't care what anyone says. He has continuously always made bad decisions for quote unquote the greater good. And we see that narrative all the time, and this was no different. And a lot of times when people talk about X-Men versus Avengers and they're defending the things of the Avengers, they're forgetting like this isn't an isolated incident. This is years and years of a group of people trying so many different ways to like just be left the fuck alone.
Yeah, like in the Dark Utopia run, when they're maybe it's not the Dark Utopia run. Which one am I? Okay, comic stuff also blends together. I went back and I was reading something, one of the things you suggested, and so Tony Stark was in charge of like man, the run ended or is with Bishop and Scott having to like overcharge themselves and almost like kill themselves to break down a blast door to get out some mutants who were like staying in a bunker that was literally made to contain like an experimental weapon. And some fucking military guy had decided to, I'm gonna start these codes up. It was already after like there were no more mutants. They were like, we're gonna get rid of so many more mutants. Like pretty much half the mutants that are left after the events of House of M were about to be killed. And Tony Stark is, Bishop is on the side of like the people that are, setting curfews for the, it's during Civil War. It's definitely during Civil War. Yeah, that's what it is. It's the X-Men Civil War run. There's like the 198 mutants and like they've been sequestered on, at the Institute for Gifted Children, you know, Charles Xavier's mansion or whatnot, and Domino and one other person, guy has swords or whatever, comes and breaks them out and gets them into a defunct bunker. And Bishop is the point of this is, in a lot of runs, Tony Stark is always like in charge of some like paramilitary operation that is engaging in limiting the rights of mutants. Like he was in charge of like that Sentinel program or one of the advisors to it or whatnot. But at the end of the day, he was able to call shots. He was like, I think Bishop should be the field operations person, and like suggested that to the Secretary of Defense, who was like, yeah, that's a great idea. Like the man has consistently put himself in places in the hierarchy of places in organizations that are engaging in oppressive behavior against mutants. So like it's in the continuity period. Like it's not like my understanding is it's still a part of this whole line of things. And so it's not just this like, oh, Tony's trying to, no, Tony's always a fuckhead all the time, every time. And like, while we're on the note of like Tony being a fuckhead, when we were in our Discord chat, when we were talking about this before we actually got going, we you mentioned how people like treat Cyclops killing Charles as like an unforgivable act, and I'm just like, look, even if he was wrong to do it, which he was not, I stand by that thoroughly. Worse things have happened and people have been redeemed from it, like you said, Captain America, Tony, Reed Richards.
Reed Richards is the greatest villain in the Marvel universe that we never talk about.
We never, and even when we do talk about the man, he like, nobody is saying he's irredeemable. And I asked this question, and I'd love if you have any expanding thoughts on it. It's like, do you think the redeemability of these three? So they're all white, all four of them. Scott,
Tony,
Steve, Scott, Reed. Tony, Steve, Reed. All four white people, right? All white people. However, of the four, only one of them is a mutant. Only one of them is operating as this as like a stand-in for minorities. Do you feel like the people that are like saying that Scott is irredeemable for this action, despite the things he's like, the reasonings behind it and stuff, are coming at it, but they'll allow for the other three to have to be redeemed, or not even say that they're irredeemable or that their acts were wrong, is very much coming from a place of like consciously or subconsciously recognizing that he holds that minority space? Because, you know, like people are often like, take the French riots right now, right? So happy for it. So glad that they're doing it. People upholding them as like, hey, this paragon of like, yeah, look at what they're doing. And they're like, why don't we do this? And we're like, we did this in 2020 and y'all called us thugs, wild animals. You stood by while like, you know, we got kidnapped and shoved, you know, like very much how it's, you see how people of color versus predominantly white people and groups are treated when they engage in the same behaviors. But yeah, does it feel like that lack of redeemability for Scott is coming from an unconscious or conscious place of seeing him as a minority and seeing these four that they're operating in that kind of white space?
Yeah, I think it's a very sloppy like representation of like white supremacy, right? Because it can only be done through the lens of like a white man suffering as a minority group, i.e., all YA dystopian fiction. But yeah, I think it's a good, if not for me, like very sloppy like conversation to have around like what is the difference between leading a revolution and or just rioting, right? Because it comes down to like upholding white supremacy, right? White supremacy, a lot of times when people talk about it, people are like, oh, that's just saying the way people are greater. Like, it's upholding that one group is inherently better than everybody else, and that the only way you can gain equality is to be like one said group, right? I recently did a talk where I was talking about the history of like modern racism, and at the center of it is not like the creation of blackness, but the creation of whiteness, right? Like whiteness is the biggest problem, because whiteness gives people permission to treat other people like subhuman, right? And we see that continuously throughout like the X-Men comics, of like, this is a group of people that people are scared of. Why? And it's done under the coast of like, they have these powers that can cause all of this harm. Yeah, but we also have superheroes, who like exist in this world and who also have that same capability, but we're not holding them to the same, to the same standards as we are holding mutants. And why is that, right? Because like it's a stand-in for whiteness, right? Of like maintaining power, maintaining control, because even in like the Latin language of mutant, they're referred to as homo superior, right? They're referred to as inherently being the next stage of evolution. When they talk about mutants, right, they talk about them as being the next stage in evolution, even though they're still humans, right? Like I think at the core that they're not inhumans, right? Humans which are created by other people. We're not going to get into the Inhumans history, but mutants are still humans, right? Like mutants are still humans. They are not a completely different race. They are still humans. We still are in the same genus when we talk about them. And I think it's easy to forget that. And like that's why people are so scared, is because I think of like how but like in that universe, language matters. The way we talk about people, like labeling them homo superior, the making the narrative that like children are walking nuclear warheads, or mutants. Like they don't say humans, they don't say children, they say this mutant is a weapon. They don't talk about them like they're human. And we see that narrative reflected in our real life when we talk about like we talk about school shootings, or we talk about like shootings. When we're referring to a white man committing the crime, we're referring to him as a white man. We're human. They humanize him in the news. But when we talk about a minority group doing it, right, we use every other word except for a person, right? And that's not to say that those things are forgivable, right? But it's a continued narrative that paints these people as being bad. And we see that reflected in the writing, and or is consistent, like white supremacy perfectly replicated in that situation in the comics. And it offers an interesting like thought experiment of what if minority groups did have limitless power. How, like, what extremes would people go to like make sure they can never access that power, right? And it also speaks to like mutants as a group of people, right? That like they do have this power, and continuously most people don't burn it all down, right? It makes you think like back to the riots when there's that one black woman in Atlanta, right? And she's crying, and she's like, they're so scared that we're gonna do to them what we did. And I was like, they're wondering like, why are we burning all this down? Because we never had anything. If we wanted to, we could, but that's not what we want. We don't want to like cause harm. We just want to be left alone and treated like people, right? And we see that constantly through like, and then every once in a while when one of them pops off, right, they're like, see, the entirety of them is bad. They'll point to Magneto every time. They'll point to Michael Pointer. They'll point to what's his name, Speedball, when we kick off Civil War, right? They'll point to these in like in a population, right? Like there's all these people that do all these bad things, but they'll be like, this proves that our racism and our discrimination was right. Even though majority mutants just fucking vibing, dude. Not doing a fucking thing.
Mm-hmm. And like I'm like thinking about that and listening to that, like the number of like spider adjacent villains like I'm like, I know that there's like the lower level of like Spider-Man's a menace, JJ Jonah or whatever, but like the number of like spider like and adjacent villains there have been, you don't have everybody out here saying, well, all the spiders gotta go. You see that shit? Like it's just to agree with what you're saying, yeah, it's very frustrating and very clear, just like waiting for that moment to feel like your bigotry, to say something in a way that you feel like your bigotry is justified. Because after that Speedball incident, which is really frustrating to even have that be what kicked it off, because a lot of the time people are talking about it are like, they're villains, right? They're using bad guys, bad mutants to point out that, oh, look at this. Like, they're all bad. That motherfucker did something stupid and made a mistake. And it
and it was catastrophic. And that's the catalyst of the Mutant Registration Act. And I'm sitting over here like, I 100% don't agree with them just in general pointing to like one bad mutant, you're all bad, but also to use somebody who was trying to do something good, even for the wrong reasons, as like proof and be the catalyst for this, despite all of the other stuff that's happening, never sat right with me. And like, and it's just like of all the examples you could use, it's that one.
By the way, shout out to Speedball and his redemption arc. His run is Penance. One, perfect costume design. Second of all, really good run in Civil War with Penance. That's all I want to say. Speedball, I forgive you. Listen, I thank you for inviting me on here, because I much like my best friend Bennett, do support a lot of the things that villains do, or maybe not support, but like understand how we got here, and just think they are deeply interesting to like watch and relate to. I love watching broken people try to fix themselves.
That's the line. Ugh, that's so good. Okay, so we've talked about Civil War. We've talked about X-Men Utopia. We've talked about X-Men versus Avengers, and how everything went to shit after the Avengers continuously pushed everybody into this. Again, not like saying they didn't do bad things, because I'm gonna be real here. When Wakanda Forever came out, I was very much like, I am a Namor stand. I'm standing these war crimes. And I was talking to a friend about like old X-Men runs before it ever came out. I was like, I defend Namor at every point in time. And then I recalled, oh, that's right, he did just like decide to drown all of Wakanda, which he then continued to do again in the movies. I don't stand that behavior. However, we did get here after, like, that wasn't the first thought. That wasn't the first thing to happen. And Namor was a little was taking things a little too far. But I think at this point, I guess what I'm asking you is, anything else you'd like to add before I ask for your closing arguments to the jury here?
I'd like to say that also Scott Summers willingly turned himself in when it was all said and done. I think that should be offered on the table of like, he like was like, he's seen like, damn, I went too far, but lock me up. lock me up. Damn, y'all right, I went a little too hard in the paint here. Lock me up. I'm sorry, guys, a little hard in the paint, and like willingly took the incarceration. I think that there's like something to be said in that of like, Scott isn't, blind to like the weight of those things and what they do. I think when it was all said and done, because like we said earlier, like he 100% went into this knowing that the future that I'm building is not one that I'll ever live in. And especially like Hope taking possession of the Phoenix, and him like, getting his wits about him and seeing all that, is like, I've done everything I can here. My part's over. It's now her turn. She'll do better than me. They all will do better than me. And that's why I love him. I also just love his cockiness. There's a couple other things that are on the table about like Scott Summers, of like Scott Summers inherently understanding who he is, and then also just like Dark Avengers, Dark X-Men, and the way he toyed with Norman Osborn is, for me, the moment I was like tucking my hair behind my ears of like, yes, when he flies off in the jetpack. There's a very specific panel, and I think it's in Dark Avengers, where like Norman Osborn has like a meeting with Cyclops in like secret, and he's like, listen, I'm gonna give you every chance to get out of this. You're outgunned, outman. I have checkmate. And Scott's like, that's cute that you think that, but I'm gonna go ahead and warn you now. You want to get a street fight with me? You actually don't have the upper hand. And when this is all done, you'll look real stupid. So I'm offering you a chance to back out. And both of them like, and Norman Osborn being foiled at any point in that whole like saga of like I forget what it like. It had a bigger name that wasn't just like Dark X-Men, and because his end goal was like to destroy, like to bring down Asgard or some shit like that. I don't remember, and it ends up with Bob like fucking killing a bunch of fucking people. And him flying off on the jetpack, and I was like, is this the moment where like I changed my opinion of Scott Summers? Is this attractive? Is this attractive? Let's also get down to that. I will like listen. Does everything I said completely valid? Yes. Was it originally motivated by me being attracted to him outwitting another white man and flying off in a jetpack? Yes, definitively.
Listen, however you get to the right answer is
best
right.
Costume design is Scott wearing that all blue over the head, like unitard onesie that he wears. Best it's
good
best
looking
version,
white man,
right? Like I get it. But yeah, like he has everything we want. You know, he's attractive. He's smart. You know, he's got ambitions. We love to see all these things from our girlie. Scott Summers is just a very interesting character. Very interesting character that I think deserves to be reprimanded and also deserves his flowers. I think it's never been about me defending Scott being a good person. What I'm defending is people believing that he is a boring character, that he is just a Boy Scout or a foil to Wolverine, because the 90s cartoons and the early X-Men movies, the Fox X-Men movies, paint this man to be that, when if you read the comics, he is so much more than that. He is the point of this argument, jury, members of the court, is never been should Scott Summers be forgiven for his crimes? No. The argument has been, is he a good character? And that is a completely different argument that we're having, because I'm not saying anything he did was right. I personally am saying everything he did was right. But like objectively, he's done bad things. But does that make him a bad character? No. Arguably, one of the most interesting X-Men to exist in the entirety of comics. One of the most interesting characters to exist in all of comics, given where he started and where he is. We love seeing our good boys go through their villain eras. We love seeing them get a redemption arc, because he does later. Right? He dies and he gets brought back to life. And he continues to be a little fuckboy, but like, he understands his place in it, that like, it's not for him to like, you know, be at the forefront. And members of the jury, that's my argument. I offer the evidence, I offer this information to you, and ask you to consider the crux of the question. Is he a good character? Not is he a good man? I rest my case.
Also, members of the jury, I would position to you, outside of Barnaby resting, are the things he's doing really irredeemable, or is he being looked at through the lens of people having biases against minorities doing things in, like, one, trauma response ways, and two, to ensure a safer future for their own people, versus all of these other powered beings such as Captain America, Tony Stark, and Reed Richards? I also rest my case. But yeah, I think with that, that's where this episode is going to end. Please, y'all, members of the jury, please let us know what you thought about this argument. Like, tag us, tweet us, retweet this, retweet the actual announcement for when it goes live. But Barnaby, please, would you like to retell the people where they can find you, what you do, you are?
My name is Barnaby. You can find me all over the internet at that's_Barnaby. I don't really have anything big to push other than call your legislators. There is a lot of things happening on a local level that you as an individual should know about. There's lots of really harmful bills being passed. Call your representative. Just type in who is my representative and you will find them, and message them and call them. The great thing about representatives is they are people you can actually yell at. you can actually go to their office or talk to them on the phone or schedule a meeting to come and talk, because they have a obligation to speak to their constituents. So trans lives matter, Black lives matter, fuck the TikTok ban, Second Amendment rights need to stay around. That's my plug. I have nothing to push. I'm so sorry. Like, every time I come with these fucking things.
No. Don't apologize. No worries. It's just an extra little space for you to plug anything you wanted. And everybody, there'll be links, information in the show notes, where you could read these runs if you're interested in. And yeah. So thank you so much for being here, everybody. Thank you so much for listening. Barnaby, thank you so much for being here. And y'all, we'll see. I'll hear you again at the latest 2 weeks when the next official VJ Talks episode drops. Catch y'all later. Bye, everybody.